Aloha, my name is Julie Mitchell, and I am the Executive Director here at Ikahi Mediation Center on Hawaii Island, or people also call it the Big Island. Welcome to our Finding Solutions Growing Peace Brown Bag Lunch series. Ikahi is a nonprofit community mediation center. We're one of 5 in the state. We serve East Hawaii, and we're located in Hilo. We were founded 40 years ago. It's our anniversary year this year. Back in 1983, we were originally a program of the Island of Hawaii YMCA. And in 2006, we became our own independent nonprofit. Our mission is to empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options, and to find their own best solutions. And to achieve our mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and training, like this brown bag talk today, to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. Our brown bag lunch series is held every third Thursday at 12 noon on Zoom, and you have to register on Eventbrite each time to receive the Zoom link. Our next speaker will be on September 21st with Indi Rishi Singh. He's going to be speaking on the topic neuroplasticity and resilience, how to be responsive rather than reactive. And I will be putting the link to register for that in the chat box now. At the end of our talk today, we will ask you to fill out a short online survey, which will be also in the chat. This helps with our grant funding for our free series. When I put that survey link in the chat, you just click into it and you don't have to stay on Zoom to finish it. We appreciate it if you can give us your thoughts. We use those to share with the speaker how they did, and also to think of new talks and to share with our grant funders. After today, likely tomorrow, we will send out an email that includes the slides, the link to our video, and also a link to that evaluation form, because we've been told a few people sometimes have problems clicking into the link in the chat. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our topic, the Ladder of Assumptions, a tool for self-reflection and understanding, as well as our speaker, Sandra DeLateur, who is an attorney, mediator, and hearing officer who, after 25 years of practicing law, limited her practice to alternative dispute resolution. In 2021, she founded Community Conflict Resolution Services to offer communication workshops and mediation to improve harmony and foster good relationships. Helping people resolve their disagreements out of court leads to greater satisfaction in the resolution and to future happiness in general, says Sandra, and I agree. Sandra, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra DeLateur. I'm going to pull up the slides. I'm really delighted to be here today and to get going on this presentation for you. Okay. Can everybody see the presentation? If you can't, please tell Julie. Okay, so today's topic is the ladder of assumption. This is a very interesting method of self-reflection and increasing understanding. I'm presenting it today as part of the brown bag, but it is actually based on a book by Elisabeth Seaman and Jack Hamilton, who are also here on the call. The concept of the ladder of assumptions is that you can break down what happened and why when something happens to you that might not be ideal. And in doing that, they created this easily accessible, practical guide for people to use. So for today's discussion, I'm going to define conflict in a really basic way. I call it a perception that two people don't agree. In other words, you're butting heads in some fashion. The reason I say it's a perception is, as we'll find out later in the talk, sometimes you find out you're in vehement agreement with someone. You just didn't realize it because of a misunderstanding. Most people attending today have probably worked with listening techniques. You've heard about active listening. In the book, there is an even more, I'd say, deep method for listening for deep understanding of another person. It helps you hear the other people, and it encourages them to hear what you say. You all probably are good listeners. You probably don't interrupt. You probably know how to reframe and to ask questions. So you hear the words that the other person is saying. The question for today is, how do we make sure that what we're perceiving the others are trying to share is actually what they're trying to share? In other words, how do we avoid those things that are in our head? In other words, our own overlay, our own lens, when we look at something or hear some words, how do we avoid an unconscious misunderstanding or something that you just don't realize? Okay, so usually when we talk about the latter, we talk about that there was some situation where you either had words with someone or there was some type of conduct that isn't satisfactory to you. Let's say somebody broke off a relationship, or somebody said something nasty or hurtful. So basically, at this point, you say to yourself, what happened there? How did I go from being happy to being unhappy with whatever happened to you? But before we get to the latter, we need to talk about what are assumptions. Why do we have them? And they're really a response to an overwhelming amount of information that we take in every day through our senses. There is absolutely no way that you or I can take notes and process everything that we see and hear and smell and feel. And it's just impossible. And so as an evolutionary matter, we developed ways to make decisions based on very little information. We learn to make assumptions, often advantageous ones, for survival. Now, we also make other assumptions, and sometimes they get in the way. And all of us do have assumptions and conclusions in our brains. It's impossible to avoid. So these are some examples on the slide of where assumptions might be learned. Okay, your own assumptions. If you look at your family, if you look at your school, your work, your spiritual groups, how about your cultural groups? And they're just all these experiences that shape the way you look at the world. And you shortcut processes because it's the only way to function. But I do want to mention that travel is actually kind of the opposite of some of the others. Travel opens the mind to many things that you might not otherwise think about. And it's because when we're growing up in a certain area or in a certain group or culture, all we have is what's around us. So travel expands that. It gives you experiences with new perceptions, new people, new cultures. So actually, all of these things contribute to how you interpret the world around you. Okay. So the ladder of assumptions, as we use it to reflect on our own behavior, is a way to examine your unconscious perceptions and assumptions. You're going to try to identify why you made the assumptions you made, and then how they affected your actions. Okay. And if you're really going to take it to the nth degree, you look at why you caused those things to happen. Why did you make those assumptions? Is there something even deeper, something that lies underneath? Because sometimes that's what needs to change if you want to change your general attitude or your general behavior as you go forward. And some would say improve yourself. So the ladder itself has basically 5 rungs, but the very ground it's on is called the setting. So the setting is really a very simple snapshot of the situation that's not controversial. It's as if you took a camera or a little video clip. Where are you? Who are you with? What time of day is it? Those are things that are not really subject to interpretation, okay? So it's usually a fairly quick description of setting. I was at the intersection of Washington and First in the evening. That's an example of a setting. Or I was at a family gathering on Christmas Eve with a whole bunch of my family. That's a setting. So it's this sort of thing that's very simple, but it sets the stage for your next analysis. What we call the facts for the latter are the very small portion of all facts that you notice, that you internalize, that you think are important, okay? They're things that you observed or experienced that somehow informed you as you went forward. And one of the things that you just have to understand is that we can't take in all facts surrounding ourselves in any situation. It's just impossible. So we pick and choose. And sometimes conflict comes from the fact that we pick certain facts to focus on, and someone else in the same situation picks different facts to focus on. And perhaps examples of this might be an auto accident, where one person focuses on where the cars are coming from, somebody else focuses on the color of the traffic light, someone else focuses on the crosswalk and what's happening there. They're all happening, but it's what you see and decide is important. Another example might be that one person is looking at a beautiful sunset and noticing the colors in the sky and the beautiful calm water and the sand. And someone else looks at that same situation and says, oh my gosh, that's a very dangerous place to swim. And I'm not going to enjoy this at all because I'm just really worried. I saw a sign that there's a riptide. Okay. So same place, but different facts are what you are focusing on. Whoops, sorry, I apologize. There we go. So the next thing we do in the ladder, once we have the facts that we have focused on, is we look at how we interpreted those facts. And the interpretation is really how we look at it in light of our own experience. It's how we form opinions, basically. We decide how to interpret things based on what we've experienced in life and perhaps what our goals are and how we're raised and all sorts of other things that inform us on how to behave. So I think you could look at this as, this is where it gets very personal in the ladder, okay? Because everything that makes you who you are informs you of how to look at this situation, these facts. But no one else has those same exact experiences. So you are using your own lens now on the facts that you've brought forth. And I want to look at this just as a couple of examples. So I would say that if you are on an airplane and you are a passenger and you look out and you see clear blue sky, not a cloud, sun is shining, and you say to yourself, wow, this is a perfect day to be flying. That's the passenger. But what if you're the pilot? Totally different facts are important to you and totally different interpretation. You might look out and say, it looks clear, but I know there's a wind that I need to be aware of, and there's traffic I need to take, some note of, and I need to make sure that everything goes as planned. That pilot is not looking at the same facts in the same way, and he's interpreting them based on his job and on his experience. Okay. And then as we look at a situation, after we have made an interpretation of facts that are important to us, we then usually assign some kind of motive to the other person in the conflict. And unfortunately, it tends to be negative. If we're in conflict with someone, we often look at their motives as suspicious, suspect, not from a good place. So it's very common for mediators and probably many other people on the call to hear from parties, oh, that person means to do me harm. Oh, that person doesn't care. they really just are out for the money. All of these little statements that talk about a motivation for the other person, but we don't know what's in their head. We really don't know. We are making assumptions based on how we're viewing the situation. And usually it's not a flattering one to the other side. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and do generalizations now. Now, understand that as you go up the ladder, you don't always go through every single rung. So we're going to talk about that again, but assuming right now, we're going to make an assumption that we want to go through all the rungs because sometimes they are applicable. We're going to go ahead and say, you're taking the individual that you're in conflict with, you've gone through facts, interpretations, and motives, and now you're going to generalize or stereotype that person into a full group, all of whom are not good people, right? We're going to make some statement that they belong to a group that we don't know if they really belong to that group. We're just taking it way beyond the individual we're dealing with and lumping that individual into a much larger group that's much easier to make the villain or the unreasonable group or something like that. So those are important things to remember. We don't always take it that far, but sometimes we do. And one of the ways you can hear this when you are going through the ladder is if you say to yourself, they always do that, or they never do that, or, it's not a particular person. It is language that's usually plural and usually overarching, because that's what stereotypes really are. Okay. And then ultimately we go to the top of the ladder and we take an action based on all of these things that have gone through your head. I know it's hard to remember this ladder is actually in your head, but it is. You're going through and you're making all of these stops, if you will, to the point where you take an action. And as I said, you might skip generalizations, you might skip motives, but you ultimately take an action based on your view of what happened. And it is your view. You don't know what the other person is really going through unless they tell you, right? So the actions can be words, they can be leaving the room, they can be pulling out of a class. I mean, there's lots of different actions that can happen, rupturing a friendship. But a lot of times when you look at what happened, remember, we're going back to look at something that didn't turn out the way you expected, you realize you took an action based on a lot of assumptions and a lot of your own experience, but you don't know what the other person has really experienced yet. And they can do their own ladder, and we may touch on that if we have time. But right now I'm working with our ladder. It's what we're looking at to figure out what happened in a situation. Okay. So now I'm going to just put up a little summary. We've gone through all the rungs. I won't go over them again, but you can look at them. And then I'd like to apply them to a couple of fact situations. I think the key, though, which I want to hammer here, is in the next slide. In the book, there's a quote. Basically, you may find out that what you thought that person was saying is different than what you learned they were trying to tell you. Okay, that's the paraphrasing. But again, you heard the words, you tried to listen, but somehow something got garbled in your head. And it's usually because we make assumptions and we take actions without really reflecting. So this is the key to the ladder of assumptions. Trying to figure out if you really understood what they want to convey. So I'm going to relay a personal story, and then we'll apply the ladder, okay? So many years ago, I worked for a law firm that required a lot of hours and also required that we go to a lot of evening and lunch meetings. And so I left the house in the morning, ready to go to work, long day, and then go to an evening meeting. And I told my husband to please clean up the house a little bit because it was really starting to bother me. So I go through my day, I'm tired. I open the front door and I see my husband lying on the floor watching TV. And I start looking around and I realize that no house cleaning has been done. There's no neatening up. Everything's exactly where it was that morning. And I launch into a tirade about, why haven't you done this? I asked you one thing and you didn't do it. Don't you realize how tired I am? Don't you realize how hard I work? And I went off. And ultimately, he looked at me when I took a breath and said, I've hurt myself. I can't get up. You need to take me to the emergency room. And I just didn't know what to do at that point. I felt so terrible. I really felt like a heel. So I would like to apply the ladder to my story. And you can always disagree with me, by the way. This is my version of the ladder. So the first thing we do is look at setting, and that was my home in the evening. The facts that I noticed were that my husband was on the floor watching TV, not doing anything, and that the housework hadn't been done. Well, my interpretation of that was he's unhelpful, he's unsupportive. What the heck, right? And then I went even further and said, well, he won't even do this house cleaning and housekeeping. He's just not being a really good husband at that point. And I took it even further. And I said, men just don't want to support working women. You know, this is the way it always is. You hear women complain, my gosh, he's one of them. And I lectured him. And I forgot to even greet him. Poor man. He didn't even get a hello. So this is my ladder about this behavior that I really regretted. I mean, I felt just awful, and I felt that I had done this so quickly. Why on earth did I do it? Right? So I'm thinking even closer about what happened. I came up with some thoughts. One was that I witnessed my mother struggle with getting help in the house for daily chores. She was not only working, she was the breadwinner of our household, but somehow she always had to put dinner on the table. Okay. I also felt that I was raised with a gender bias where men just didn't have to do any kind of housework. And at the time I was in the law firms in the LA area when this took place, there was still a lot of gender bias, I think, in the law firms. And I felt it, and I was not happy about it. And I also was extremely tired. It was a very long day. So instead of thinking and asking my husband, why are you on the floor? And by the way, hello, I went ahead and blew my cool. And I forgot how much I care for him. And I acted in anger. So this is just an example of something I did. And I'd like to go ahead and keep going with some more examples. And of course, if you have questions in the chat, go ahead and send them to Julie and we will answer them. So there is also a story in the book about a men's group. And this one, I put up the basic facts here in the slide. Al and Bob have been friends, and they've been meeting in this men's group for a very long time, for 1 hour a week. Okay. There's not a leadership kind of hierarchy. They take turns running the meetings, and they have really interesting discussions. And toward the end of one meeting, Al started talking about a personal experience that was related to what was being discussed. And several people seemed very attentive, and they seemed to enjoy Al's comments. And even though it was getting near the end, Al said, I would like to share another experience that ties in with the discussion. And Bob responded with sort of a chuckle or a laugh. Well, there you go again. You're always trying to extend the meeting past our agreed upon time of 1 hour. Al became really upset and stomped out of the meeting room. So what we have is Al looking at this going, you know, I've been doing this for so long. What the heck happened there? Why did I react that way? So let's see if we can apply the ladder to this little scenario. So Al would look at the setting, which is a meeting room full of the group of men's group members. He looked at the facts and came up with these facts. He wanted to share relevant comments, and Bob sort of teased him and made a degrading comment. Al interpreted that Bob had been insensitive and sort of disparaging of Al's participation in the conversation. And then he went further and he said, well, Bob just cares about time. He wants to end on time, regardless of what very salient, important, interesting comments people might want to share. And then he decided Bob was rigid and was just not compromising to hear people who had something to say. And of course, Al got hurt and angry and left the meeting in a huff. So that's the way I came up with the ladder here based on that scenario. And again, if we want Al to understand, he now understands what happened. But the next question is, why? Why did he do that? Can he be honest with himself and reflect on why did he make these things happen the way they did? Why did he take the action he did? So as he reflected, Al came to recognize that he had a pattern of reacting to any perceived criticism by getting upset and then leaving the conversation. Instead of talking to the person, he would leave the conversation. And he also assumed that a polite person wouldn't cut him off, that there's a sort of an unwritten rule that you let people finish their thought. Okay. So after he thought about that for a while and really was honest with himself, he decided he wanted to repair his relationship with Bob. So they went ahead and went through this where Al wrote an email to Bob and he apologized. He said, look, I overreacted. I felt hurt at the time, but I realize I have a pattern of reacting this way. And I will try very hard not to do this anymore. I'm going to try to change my own behavior. And Bob was moved and accepted the apology and said that he realized he had hurt Al's feelings when he reflected on his own, even before he heard from Al. And then he offered an apology for his own comment to Al, and that was accepted. And so the two men repaired their longtime friendship. There had just been, a very short moment where everything fell apart, but they didn't let that remain permanent. They found a way to fix it. And that's part of what we're talking about with the ladder of assumptions and the deep reflection about why you do act the way you do and why you make assumptions the way you do. Because if you really take this to the nth degree, as I said, you learn from it. It's not just understanding what happened, but you learn how to try to do better. So now this one is a little bit simplified because there's so many stories out there about politics and people not getting along because of politics. But I have put something together that I hope will allow us to have a good conversation. So in this situation, I'm going to summarize here. You can read it. Anne and Carl have been friends. They meet up, and Anne is relieved that a Democrat won the presidential election. And Carl expresses dismay and isn't happy. And he says the Democrats just don't represent hardworking people. And Anne tries to talk to him, but Carl keeps interrupting and they get louder and louder. And finally, they're like the center of this, table where everybody's kind of watching them going, oh, what's going to happen next? These people are getting really upset. And then Carl says, well, you'll never understand what it's like to be me, a white male, and how I've suffered due to affirmative action policies. I really used to believe in merit, promotion and merit hiring, and I just believe that's out the window with these liberal policies. In fact, Democrats don't have traditional values and they really want to ruin the country. At this point, Anne gets so upset that she just stops talking to Carl and decides she doesn't want to see him again, even though they were friends for a long time. So this is the scenario, like I said, a little simplified, but let's see if we can apply the ladder. So Anne is going to look at this and say, what was the setting? Well, they were at a restaurant with old friends in a group. She looks at what happened, and what she remembers and focuses on is that Carl and she disagreed about politics. And also Carl kept interrupting her and using a very loud voice, basically talking over her. She interpreted this based on her experiences and her upbringing as an attack. And especially when he got to the point where he made these generalizations about Democrats, she believed that he was including her. And so she felt that she was being attacked for not only just disagreeing, but being stupid and being uncaring. And that really upset her. So then she decided, Carl doesn't respect anybody. No, he just doesn't understand how to talk to people. He just doesn't show any respect. In fact, he's part of that group, those reactionary conservatives, and they want to reverse progress and they won't listen. And I just, I can't deal with it, is what she had come up with. And that's why she shut down and decided not to see Carl as a friend anymore, which is sad because they had a friendship that had been going on for some time before politics came and basically interfered. So this is one ladder here. But again, can we ask, why would Anne cut off Carl? Why would she stop speaking to him if they had been friends for so long? Okay, so she's asking herself, can I get, a little deeper into this? And she realizes that she just has a deep distrust of conservative leaning people. And she didn't know that about Carl. So this was a new piece of information that got sort of presented in a way that she didn't like, because she also doesn't like anybody that raises their voice or interrupts her. So I think one of the things to note here on this example is you have a content disagreement about politics, but you also have a stylistic disagreement. Okay, they have different communication styles. And that's sometimes the biggest problem people have. Sometimes it's just one of many, I would say. But in this case, she also didn't like the way he was treating her and discussing things with her. And once she realized that, that's something to consider. But let's say Carl also feels a little funny about what happened. Remember that unhappy face we had earlier, the smiley face that's upside down? What if he says, wait a minute, I lost a friend here. Let me do the latter. So again, they have the same setting pretty much, but he looks at it as they disagreed about the Democrats elevating progressive policies and traditional values. So to him, this is really an important distinction. And he felt that Anne didn't hear him, that Anne had not heard that he had personal experiences that supported his opinion. And so he thinks Anne just doesn't understand that men can experience discrimination. Okay, that she focuses only on affirmative action and she can't see a flip side where it's reversed. And he also decided that she was naive, basically not aware of true facts. And that's a really hard thing when somebody concludes that their conversation partner has no validity in their opinion because they don't know the facts. That's a very hard thing for people to grapple with. It's one thing to have a disagreement. It's another thing for someone to say, you don't know what you're talking about. All right. Or you're uninformed. Those kinds of conclusions are very painful. But he went even further in his last couple of comments to her. He lumped her in with unpatriotic liberals. Okay. And this is, of course, a label, and it applies to a lot of people perhaps, but he took an individual and worked his way to adding her to this large group. And she had done the same thing, if you recall. So both of them took an individual friend and ended up with these much greater generalizations about what group the other one belonged to. And he knew that he had disagreed with her loudly and belittled her. Okay, so he did realize that he did that, and that maybe she was upset about it. So as we go back, though, and look at this, maybe Carl has a reason why he did what he did. So let's take a look. So Carl had a personal story where he was hurt. And I think this is a common theme. A lot of people find that they espouse a general opinion, but it comes from a place where they've had a personal experience that's extremely difficult and hurtful. And I don't think that anybody in Carl's friend group understood that he had that experience. Okay, so him sharing that maybe in more detail would be helpful for them to understand. Okay, He also didn't feel heard by Anne, so he wanted her to say something that showed she heard him. And also, he comes from a different background where his family loves to disagree. They think it's fun to raise voices and interrupt each other, and and then they go on and everything's fine. There is no break off of relationships because you had a disagreement that was, maybe a little robust. So that's a communication style issue where he and Anne don't agree on how to communicate. And not to mention, they also have the content disagreement. So is it possible to have a repair between Anne and Carl? I mean, that's one of the questions is, do they want to repair the relationship after doing this kind of self-reflection and analysis and, maybe deep thinking? And they could come up with different things they could do to try to preserve this relationship in some way, but each of them probably needs to acknowledge boundaries. And as the mediators can tell you that are on the call, this could take any form. These are just possible examples. There's no right answer. The right answer is it's whatever they would like, right? So this is just a set of suggestions for them so they could look at repairing their relationship. So basically, the ladder of assumptions is a simple concept, but applying it takes a lot of work and self-reflection, and I would say honesty and humility. In order to go through a ladder and really understand why you did something, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to look at yourself in a different way than you usually do. And then once you have figured out a little more about how you operate, how your mind works, then you can take a step back. And sometimes we call it climbing back down the ladder and trying to figure out where you went, shall we say, astray, where you kind of went off in one direction where maybe you could do better next time. So that's a part of the learning experience from going through the ladder of assumption. The other thing we can do is ask our conversation partner a lot of questions, and maybe they're willing to go through their ladder with you, because you will discover a great deal from them if you let them explain their ladder, because then you're actually getting the information of why they did what they did or what informed their action. And sometimes, as I mentioned at the beginning, you find out you're really not in disagreement. You're just looking at things a little differently. And that's really important because we look for agreements and we look for ways to get along. And this is really a tool that can help a great deal. And so I want to thank Jack and Elizabeth for their book and laying out this whole step-by-step analysis. And I also want to thank the Mediation Center for having me and their commitment to growing world peace. So thank you very much.
Okay, so that is the end of the official presentation. I'm wondering, Jack or Elizabeth, is there anything you'd like to share since we have the authors with us today? And then we will take questions.
I thought that Sandra did an excellent job of setting forth this idea of the ladder of assumptions. And I liked her emphasis on humility, that it really requires some humility to be able to look within yourself and see what was there about the assumptions you made and the actions you took that offended the other people, and try to understand that even though you didn't intend to offend somebody else, your assumptions and actions can be taken that way by another person.
Thank you, Jack. Elizabeth, would you like to share anything? Oh, you just have to unmute yourself. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I may have unmuted. I may have muted you. I was going to ask you to unmute and then I remuted you. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. Can you try again?
Okay. Yes, I think Sandra did a very good job with all those three examples, which are quite different from each other. And so there, I think that we can probably relate well to them. And especially also the fact that we don't necessarily have a disagreement with each other, but we just respond to things differently based on our own experiences and background. And I think that's something important to keep in mind in our relationships. And Sandra, you did a beautiful job. Thank you so much.
Okay, so who has questions for Sandra, Jack, Elizabeth, or whomever, or wants to make a comment or have a further discussion about this? Because we still do have some time left on our call. Sandra had timed herself and she left enough room at the end for questions, because we say we're going to do questions and then sometimes we run out of time on our brown bag. So who wants to make a question, comment? You can unmute yourself and ask it, or you can do the raise hand feature, or you can type something in the chat.
Julie, is Porny. I have a request. I would like to know the answer for, those examples, because it's very interesting to see if we use this ladder of assumption, and then can we come to any solution for those examples, both the politics discussion and also, actually all the example that Sandra brought up is very true. It happened to many of us. So we want to see what would be the solution, any result.
You're asking, Porny, let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You're asking what would happen after someone did their own ladder assumption, or they did it together? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I want to see if there is any result that came out from that.
Thank you, Porny.
Thank you, Julie.
I would, if I can respond, I think that if you really do an honest ladder and you can get another person you're working with to do a ladder, you discover what's really going on in their mind. And you stop making the assumptions that are just based on your side of the story. So in a lot of situations we've seen, once you understand where the other person is coming from, that's another way to put it, kind of, then you have much greater understanding of why they did what they did or why they said what they said. So it actually repairs a lot of relationships.
Right. Thank you, Sandra. However, it's not going to work if one person, even you try to use this and you have mediator skill and try to use it. But if the other person refuses to try to understand the fact and the situation, it's not going to work, right?
I think there are different levels of how you define how it works. Sometimes you're looking for just peace and better understanding for yourself. And it's not really a matter of working with the other person to repair a breached relationship or ruptured relationship.
Okay, yeah, that is a good answer. Thank you, Sandra.
Sure.
Do you want to add something, Jack? I saw you were still unmuted.
Oh, no, I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Kahea, you have your hand up. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra, for those examples. It resonates so much for all of us, I'm sure. I'm kind of understanding the ladder and the process, and I also see that the window of helping somebody understand why you might be questioning what happened is the difficult part. And I'm wondering what you have to say about that.
Let me see if I understand a little bit of what you're asking. So is it your concern that asking someone to go through a ladder is awkward? How do you get there?
Yes, but if it's a person that's made up their mind and all of their assumptions about you or you of them, but more about the other part, that somebody has already made all these assumptions, but you want to understand it, but this person does not want to engage at all. They want to stay there. You can do the ladder for your internal process. Yeah, but I don't see yeah, it's like kind of stuck.
Well, I think the only answer really that I could come up with on that is that there are different ways to approach people to engage. And I think, again, mediators and attorneys probably have a whole host of examples of that. But you have to try to find something that they consider important in order to get them to engage. And if they just refuse, you don't have a lot perhaps you can do with them. But even just saying, I would like to understand why you said that. Or would you share with me what you were thinking when you did that? I mean, you can do a question that sort of asks what the ladder asks, but without going through the ladder.
Right.
And I think some people desperately want to be understood, even if they're absolutely sure they're right. So if you actually appeal to them and say, you know we have a disagreement. I would very much like to understand your point of view. Would you be willing to share that with me? You're not arguing with them. You're not trying to make them see your point. You're simply asking them to share. So that might be one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That works a lot. And sometimes when it doesn't, I'm just not understanding the best way to go about it, because when they've made an assumption of you based on what category or group you belong to, they disengage entirely because they don't want to associate. They're not really that interested in going into the whole story of why they think that. They're like frustrated, I guess, to even engage with somebody who's thinking opposite of them. But yeah, maybe
it's not easy. It's not easy, and particularly in the political arena. I mean, I don't have any easy answers.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
No, got it.
Who else has a comment or a question that they would like to make? We still have some time left. Charlie, yes. Oh, yeah, please unmute.
There I am. You got me?
Yes.
One of the difficulties I have, and I think this latter presentation is really good because it gives you a framework to think it out, is it's often difficult for me to figure out why I walk out of a room. And it takes a lot of soul searching, and it's just part of life. But I eventually, even though I can't identify why I walked out of the room, I still have to admit to myself it was wrong, but I haven't figured out why yet. You got any comments on that?
I think this is where, the deep self-reflection and humility are really coming into play. Sometimes we don't want to recognize assumptions that we make. They're either embarrassing or they're not politically correct, or, there's so many reasons why we might be ashamed of why we made a decision we made or why we said something. But if you can be honest with yourself, you have a better chance of not repeating it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'll share something that I remembered, and I'm gonna post it in the chat. Kenneth Cloak, I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He's quite a big name in mediation and interpersonal as well as international dispute resolution. And I remember in the this was in the 2020 election, he wrote about how you could talk to someone with a different view of yours, and it's really a whole slew of questions that seem very disarming. And it would be a way to, if you realize you've started climbing the ladder, sometimes you realize you put your foot in your mouth, if you're not too far up where you haven't walked out of the room yet, you could be like, you know what, that wasn't a very, let me take that back. Instead, can I ask you a question? And then, ask one of these gems. I'm putting it in the chat now. And there are things like, what life experiences have you had that led you to feel so passionately about this issue? Or why do you care so much about this issue? What are some of the key words or phrases that divide us? What are some of the key words or phrases that unite us? I remember reading this and feeling very excited by it because he really is talking a lot in his work about the primary role that conflict resolvers could have all over the world in all situations, from politics to governmental decision making. I mean, he's a very big, broad thinker. So I highly recommend his work, as well as taking a look at that, especially in regards to the one example that you shared about the two, the woman and the man with the liberal and conservative politics.
Right. Well, I think one of the interesting things that all of us can relate to is, if you judge somebody and then you find out that there's a very good reason why they did something or said something, you just didn't know it at the time, we immediately feel much more sympathetic and connected because we now understand something much better. So if you look at the world as, you know, we just need to understand more, we need to connect more. And the more we pull away, particularly because of politics, but even because of other things, the more we pull away, the less chance we're giving ourselves to connect. And that connection is just so important for understanding and moving forward and building that harmony and, you know, a better world. So thank you.
Wow, that was such a great statement. I feel like we should close there unless anyone has any other questions or comments. Not see. Oh wait, let me here's a message. Oh, it's people saying thank you in the chat. Well, I really appreciate all of you spending your lunch hour with us. For those of you who are in Hawaii. Oh, here's another one. Sorry. Grayson is asking, how do we move to the point of humility so this conversation can take place?
Did I give it a shot? I think one of the ways to move toward humility is to really decide that right and wrong don't matter. Understanding, connection, trying to be a good human being, all these things are much more important than being right or wrong. I think one of the mistakes we make sometimes is trying to just claim sort of the prize, right? We're gonna be the better, you know, the better arguer, or the one who gets the most out of something, or the most recognition, or whatever it is. And instead, we need to step back and really look at what's important and prioritize what's important. And that's what helps me with humility.
Jack or Elizabeth, do you have anything to add to that, since you created this model?
Well, I would agree with Sandra. The relationship is more important than being right.
Yes, also that we can constantly be asking ourselves, what can we do to communicate more effectively with others? What are we doing that is preventing effective communication or limiting it? And that self-reflection, I think, is where we start with ourselves. And once we can do that, then we can help others on the same path.
Thank you so much to Sandra, Jack, Elizabeth, all of you for being here today. I did put the link to the survey in the chat box, if you don't mind to fill that out. Several people have been putting in the chat, are we going to share a copy of the slides and video? The answer is yes. That will likely come out either later today or tomorrow, depending on how fast I can get it uploaded to our YouTube channel. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming today. We appreciate your participation in this series, and we appreciate our presenters here today. Oh, Analea, I'm seeing your hand going up. We have 2 minutes left. What would you like to say?
This is just real quick. funny, but it's sort of real. It's, this thing about being humble, and sometimes you said something and you're like, yike, that's not good. So a very distinguished professor said, use this line: I know you think you heard what I said, but I'm not sure that what I said is what I meant. And then restate it, or like right when it happens. So it's like, you're calling yourself in a way, but you're honoring them. I know you think you heard what I said, but that take two. So anyway, that's kind of what, if it would work for you, it has worked for me.
Thank you very much, Analea. I appreciate that. So any final words? Whoops, that's our 1 o'clock alarm. Any last words, Sandra?
No, and thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate the great questions as well. There's so much here and so many great minds. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you next month. Please do look out for the email with the video slides. It'll have the link to the evaluation form if you couldn't click into the one in the chat box, as well as the link to register for the next Brown Bag Talk with Indy Rishi Singh. Have a great day, everyone. Aloha.
Aloha.